I won't be backing the next Gloomhaven Kickstarter, or at least I think I won't. And to be more technically specific, it's the next Cephalofair Kickstarter, not necessarily the next Gloomhaven Kickstarter. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Thanks for watching, subscribe, like. I don't usually say those things, but they're here now. But effectively, if you don't already know, Gloomhaven is, or Cephalofair, again, you see that little dichotomy there. Cephalofair announced at PAX Unplugged, that they are going to have another upcoming Kickstarter sometime in 2022, I believe that's the plan. I mean, if it's 2021, they'd be running out of time very quickly. But their next Kickstarter's a line of miniatures. A line of miniatures for all their current games. And I'm curious whether it's just their current games or teasing towards the future. You see, here's what we know so far. We know that there's going to be a line of upcoming miniatures that they're putting out that will be on Kickstarter that will not be cheap. We don't know how cheap or not cheap things are, but they will not be cheap. They're going to be covering Gloomhaven, they're going to be covering Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, and they will be covering Frosthaven. Now, there is that part of the back of my head that wonders, well, I assume Frosthaven will have some sort of Jaws of the Lion equivalent, some sort of accessible entry point to that one as well, and it would be interesting to not necessarily have those miniatures available at the same time. Well, you're going to do another Kickstarter, some other thing in the future, or maybe they just don't have that. I don't really know the exact details, so I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on what we do know, and the fact that there's going to be a miniatures line for Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, and for Frosthaven that will not necessarily be cheap. Also, Isaac Childress said very clearly that he's, first of all, not 100% comfortable with this. This is never the vision for Gloomhaven, and second of all, is you do not need them. You absolutely do not need them, and I'm someone who does not need a lot of things that I happen to back on Kickstarter, but I like the new. I like the shiny. I love miniatures, and yet I'm not backing, or at least I don't plan on backing, the Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, Gloomhaven miniatures, Cephalofair miniatures. It's just all words. Why not? And as a starting baseline, I'm happy that this Kickstarter exists for those who do want it. For those who do want to back it. For those who do feel they want those miniatures. I am very happy. I will get into this more at the end of the video, with timestamps as usual down below. I want to be very clear up front, though. This is not a complaint. This is not a rant. This is not anything other than why I'm not backing it and why I'm happy it exists. That's the point of this video. At least it is to me. The reason is not that I haven't played Gloomhaven. I've played Gloomhaven, gave it a few plays when I first got it, then let it sit on the shelf unplayed for a long, long time. Jaws of the Lion, on the other hand, I recently made a video saying I have to play Gloomhaven or I have to get rid of it. I've had the game in my collection way too long. I love the game, but I'm not playing it, so I have to table it. I have to show myself and remind myself why I want to keep this game, or it's leaving my collection. And it's not leaving my collection. See, underneath this table over here, this table is a link in the description. I don't get any referral commission or anything. I just like this table. This Man Pass game design table, underneath this table, underneath this thing here, a little hollow feel there, I have Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion set up, and I've slowly been going through the campaign, slowly been going through it to get to know it more, to remind myself why I like the system. I still have not dived back into Gloomhaven for a long time, and the reason for it is a combination of having a lot of games, but the primary reason for it is accessibility. Gloomhaven was such a fun experience for me when I first played it. I really, really loved it. And you know what I didn't love about it? I didn't love setting it up. I didn't love looking at this box, taking everything off, and even with an insert. I have an insert in here. I have a wooden insert. I don't know what brand it is, whatever it is, but I have an insert. So don't tell me that, oh, Alex, you need accessibility, you need to get an insert. I have all that. I do. And yet, even with the insert, this game is a beast to table. This game is a beast to remember, all the little exceptions, the rule details, how to play it correctly to ensure you're doing things the right way. This is a game I have no interest in playing on video because I guarantee you I would make 17 mistakes and people would be like, oh, that Board Game Co guy doesn't know how to play games. I mean, true. But Gloomhaven is such a hard game to table. Despite how good it is, I don't play this game. Jaws of the Lion, on the other hand, Jaws of the Lion, I mean, hey, we have Forgotten Circles in Shrink over here that I don't know if I'll ever get. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I don't know. I've told myself that I will not make any decisions around Gloomhaven and Forgotten Circles until I finish Jaws of the Lion. When I finish Jaws of the Lion and I'm looking at the game and I'm trying to sit there what to do next, I will either be getting rid of Gloomhaven and Forgotten Circles and probably not coming back to the series for a while, or I'll be getting rid of these and getting Frosthaven, or I'll be diving into these and trying to figure out a way to make it work, because the gameplay of Gloomhaven is amazing. I understand completely why it's the #1 game on Board Game Geek for the past 2-3 years now. I understand completely. The game is incredible. The game is amazing. And yet despite that, accessibility stops me from tabling the game. So as much as I love miniatures, as much as I love deluxifying my games, as much as price sadly likely wouldn't be a factor, I allow myself, I've talked about this in other videos, I allow myself one degree of irrationality in my life. And I believe a lot of board game purchases are irrational. I believe if you have unplayed games and you're still seeking out that new hotness, if you're still looking for something new, and you have unplayed games on your shelf, you are effectively looking to spend money to fill a need that doesn't need to be filled. In other words, the only possible justification I have for board games is that it's not a rational purchase. It's not, oh, it's the best hobby in the world. It is, to be very clear. I think it is, at least. It is the best hobby. But it's one that you're filling a need that doesn't need filling. You're buying a game to play when you already have games you aren't playing. Now, if you're someone who doesn't fall into this category, that's not true for you. If you only buy games as you're looking for new experiences and you don't have a shelf of shame or whatever it is, then by all means, that's a different story. But for many others out there, myself included, who have unplayed games and you're still seeking out new ones, it is an irrational chase of something you love, and I'm okay with that. No differently than I'm okay heading out to the local, ice cream shop and getting some ice cream. I don't need it. I want it. And I allow myself to be a little bit irrational in my life. I don't take massive vacations. I don't spend money needlessly in any other aspect of my life. And even then, even within that subgenre of allowing myself to be irrational, I still take a fairly rational approach. I still take an approach of, well, will it hold its value? Will it not? Gloomhaven is a game I can sell years later, and I will lose on the shipping of it, which is not a small amount, but the game, for the most part, I'll get back what I paid for it back in the day. Many games I will specifically try to focus on. It doesn't make sense to back it, doesn't not, all that, but I still allow a degree of irrationality. But that's only when it comes to what I want. That's not the approach I take when it comes down to what will or won't get played. Meaning, at the end of the day, I'll allow myself to get something, even though it's joining a shelf of things that aren't being played, and I have to pick and choose now, and I'm faced with this choice of which of the whatever unplayed games I have do I want to table this week. I have that choice, I have that decision. And to a certain extent, it can be crippling. You can find yourself looking at a shelf of games and trying to figure out, I want to play all these games, and you end up pulling out something small or nothing at all because there's too much there. But I won't allow Gloomhaven to have even less of a chance of being played by getting the miniatures collection. This is for me. This is not necessarily for you. It might be for you, but it might be a worthwhile reminder. You see, I back a lot of Kickstarters. I have a dedicated video talking about why I went all in on Marvel United, why I spent $800 between everything, between the first and second Kickstarter and all that, and factoring and shipping and all those costs. I have somewhere around $800 spent on Marvel United. Why in the world would I do that? It's way more content than I can possibly justify having, playing. I know it won't happen. I know it won't get all tabled. I'm getting more than I possibly need. But it's pretty. It's shiny. It's a game I love. It's a game that's accessible. And a key component is getting more of it doesn't stop me from playing it. Marvel United, in fact, is one of the easiest games I have to table. There are some games, there are a handful of games where I get too much content and that can make it harder to play the content I have. That's not the case for Marvel United. There's so much content and I want to play it all. I want to dive into it all. It is a good, solid, accessible game system that's very, very light, but very accessible and very fun. If I get the miniatures for Gloomhaven, if I get the miniature line, then this game that is already having a struggle to be tabled will have an even harder time being tabled. Now, I think there are people who this collection is great for, and you might be one of those people. I think this is great for people who, first of all, want the miniatures and will very easily pull out the game and play it without the miniatures. I know myself, if I have the miniatures, I'm not going to want to play the game without the miniatures. And for context, by the way, Gloomhaven, if you don't already know, the heroes have miniatures, but all the other characters, all the other enemies in the game do not have miniatures in the game. So there's a lot of miniatures. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of miniatures for the game. I won't want to play without the miniatures if I have the miniatures, which means it's one more barrier in Gloomhaven getting played, and I don't want one more barrier. I want to finish Jaws of the Lion and be like, yep, Gloomhaven's worth it. I'm going to dive into it. It's going to happen. And that may or may not happen already. I don't know. But even if it does, I don't want that accessibility barrier in place to a great game. A game that already has enough accessibility issues that they made Jaws of the Lion. They literally made a game. They made an entire game structured around the idea of this game is amazing, but it's hard to play. So we're going to make this one. And now, we're going to make it harder to play with a giant miniatures line. Now again, I think there is an audience. I think there is an audience for those miniatures. I think that audience is likely going to be hardcore Gloomhaven players. Which, by the way, there's enough game here for this to be a lifestyle game. There's enough game in Gloomhaven for this to be one of the only games you own and play, or the only campaign game you own and play. There's enough of a game in Gloomhaven for that. And if you're someone, especially if you're someone, who has this game set up all the time on a dedicated table, then I think that changes the conversation. Having a bunch of miniatures on your dedicated table off to the side that you pull in as you need, I think that makes it easy to table. Not easier, but I don't think it makes it harder. And so I think that accessibility barrier that miniatures can provide is only a factor if it's one more box to pull out, if it's one more component to search for. If it's already on your dedicated game table where you have Gloomhaven set up, where you've had Gloomhaven set up for the past 4 months, then I think that changes the conversation. Now you're adding to your immersion of the game. And you're doing so without adding the cost of playability, of accessibility. I mean, think about this. At the end of the day, there are lines of terrain. Gloomhaven has an entire terrain line, multiple terrain lines of just, other companies that made just third-party 3D terrain to incorporate and add into your Gloomhaven experiences that will, again, further add, deluxify, improve your Gloomhaven experiences. And I think those will all inherently add to the barriers to actually getting the game tabled, while potentially improving the experience. And if you already have the game set up, those things are a good thing. There's clearly a demand for this content. There's clearly a demand for these miniatures. I mean, I myself, when I first got Gloomhaven, before it sat on my shelf unplayed for 2 years, I was somebody who wanted miniatures. I went online and I searched for miniatures. I played my first 2 games, I loved it, and I did what I always do but should not do, which is I immediately went to go look to see what else I can get. There's a reason I got Forgotten Circles before I even further dive down into Gloomhaven. It's because when I love something, I want to see what else I can get. I am 100% the target audience for someone who would want the Gloomhaven miniatures, and yet I'm not getting them because I'd rather play Gloomhaven than get another thing that makes it harder for me to play Gloomhaven. And so yes, I want these things. I search for the miniatures. I think that there are people who will want these miniatures, and I think there are people who these miniatures are a good purchase for. My main caution is if you're not that person. If you, like me, think that this game will have a harder time being tabled if you have the miniatures line, then think carefully before you back it. Because here's the thing for me. At the end of the day, I'm 100% tempted by this Kickstarter. I will go to this Kickstarter page, I will look at the miniatures, I will see the price point, and I will sit there and go, but maybe, and wonder to myself whether I should or shouldn't. Maybe I'll just get the Jaws of the Lion miniatures. I don't know if they're breaking them up like that, but if they are, maybe I'll just get the Jaws of the Lion miniatures. Those are good. And also, it's worth noting, if you're somebody who has, separate D&D campaigns and you generally want miniatures, then I'm sure these miniatures can be utilized in many, many other game experiences, so there's that factor to consider as well. And this campaign will do well. And to be very clear, I'm happy it exists, even though it will tempt me. Even though it will tempt me into a purchase that I should not be making, and I really, really, really hope that I do not make it at all. I really hope I don't. I'm happy it exists. I don't subscribe to the notion that we shouldn't have over-the-top deluxe Kickstarters. One of the problems, and this is going to be on a whole separate tangent, we're going to veer completely off left field at this point and talk about the nature of everyone thinking their line is perfect. Their line in the sand is perfect. You see, I'm religious. I'm sure you've noticed this. I wear a yarmulke, a kippah in all my videos. I'm clearly an Orthodox Jew. I've been so since the very beginning of this channel. I don't talk about religion that often because it usually doesn't come up, but I think it actually is a relevant point here. And I'll dive into COVID too, because why not? Let's just throw this entire video off a bridge. Jump the shark, that's the term I'm looking for. But as a religious Jew, I'm very familiar with the concept of people drawing a line in the sand and saying, my line is perfect, yours is wrong. To the left, to the right, yours is wrong. This is true in politics, this is true in religion, this is true with COVID, this is true with, unfortunately, way too many things. The idea that someone who's less religious than me, they're basically a heretic. They're doing things incorrectly. They're not following the rules that they're supposed to follow. Someone, on the other hand, to the right of me, someone who's far more religious than me, they're just extreme. They're an extremist. They take things way too seriously. They don't know exactly how to balance life and scripture and all these things. They're just wrong. People very often draw a line in the sand around what I do is correct. What I do makes sense. But what you do is wrong. That's true with even just things as simple as if I drive very recklessly through the street, I'm skilled, I'm fast, I know what I'm doing, I'm whatever. If someone else does it, they're reckless, they're horrible. We apply these labels and judgments to others that we don't apply to ourselves. In the case of COVID, because I said I'll go to COVID too, it's the same idea. Anyone who's more lax than me is basically killing people. they don't take COVID seriously enough. How dare you not get, both vaccines, the booster, and wear a mask everywhere you go, and avoid, stay 6 feet from others at all times, inside, outside. Anyone to the that's to the right. I don't know which direction I'm going here. Whichever one. If you're too lax, if you're too serious about COVID, you're crazy. You don't know how to balance safety and living your life. You're just a crazy person. And if you're too lax about COVID, it's the same problem. I can't remember which one it is, but whichever direction. The point is, if you're too lax, you're doing things wrong, and if you're too serious, you're taking things too seriously. You have to have balance, and inevitably, everyone thinks their line is balance. What I do is balance. What you do is just not careful enough, or being too careful, and you're wrong. Both of you. I'm right. That's the only person. We see it with board game purchases too. This is where we come back from my religious and COVID offshoot into board games again. I told you this video is going to completely jump the shark there. With board games, it's the idea that the people who spend their money the way I don't spend my money, they're wrong. If you're going out and buying, all these deluxe games, if you're coming back from a convention with your game haul, you're just reckless. You're buying games, you already have games you're not playing, you're a horrible human being. I don't know why you're doing it. If you back Kickstarters, you're just wrong. Like, how could you spend, I don't know how much this Kickstarter will cost, how can you spend $500 on Gloomhaven miniatures? It's insanity, and the fact that a company offers this is wrong, and it's bad, it's consumerism, it's just a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. But again, this entire hobby is filled with people who are spending money needlessly on things they don't need. There are very, very few people who could not get by on fewer games. And so really what we're doing here is we're drawing that arbitrary line in the sand of, I want you, the companies, to offer the things that I think I should get. And I don't want you to tempt me with more things because it's consumerism and it's bad. I don't take that stance. And I say this as someone who will be tempted by the Gloomhaven Kickstarter. I absolutely will be. By the miniatures, I know I shouldn't get it. It helps that I'm doing this video, because then I'll be publicly shamed if I do get it, which is good, publicly shame me. But I know I'll be tempted by it. And I'm okay with that. Because for other people, it's the right line. For other people, it's the right amount of luxury purchase. The fact that it's not for me is a different conversation entirely, because I guarantee you, Marvel Zombies is coming at some point in 2022. I guarantee you I'm going all in on that, no matter what it costs. It helps that I've played it, but in general, I'm a huge Zombicide fan, and to begin with, I'm a huge Marvel fan. The alignment of the two universes means I'll go ahead and I'll spend an unhealthy amount of money on this Marvel Zombies line, because it's a game system I love, and I'm willing to give myself that leeway. And again, just because my line's here, and Gloomhaven's line's here, your line's here, your line's here, if you're ever spending money on a board game that you don't need, if you're ever buying a board game that you already have unplayed games, if you're ever deluxifying a game at all, and if you're judging someone else who's doing it more than you, what you're doing is that same concept of my line is right, everyone else's line is wrong. These people aren't spending enough on their board games, and these people are spending way too much on their board games. And so I want to be very clear. I'm not backing the Gloomhaven miniatures line. At least I really, really hope I don't. But I'm okay with anyone who does. And I'm happy it exists for those who it serves a need, for those who it deluxifies their game, and for those who want to get it. Just because it's not for me doesn't mean it shouldn't be a thing. That's it. I don't have anything clever to add at the end. I won't be getting the Kickstarter, and I'm happy it exists. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.